there is a good chance the bread sitting in your kitchen cupboard right now is doing more hidden damage to your health than the biscuit tin next to it. And this isn't about some obscure niche product. I recently analysed 7 of the most popular loaves sold across major Australian supermarkets, and what I found was startling. Only one of them is genuinely worth putting in your trolley. One specific brand on this list is sitting in almost every Australian kitchen. It is heavily marketed as a wholesome, premium choice, and it is priced to match. Yet looking closely at the actual ingredients reveals a completely different story. I'm going to break down exactly which brand that is, along with 6 others that really shouldn't be making it into your shopping basket. Think about how we shop. When you stroll down the bakery aisle, you probably grab your usual loaf without a second thought. We check the expiry date, maybe we look at the price tag, but almost nobody turns the bag over to read the ingredient list on a standard loaf of bread. It is one of those deeply trusted, unquestioned household staples. You use it every single day: toast for the kids in the morning, sandwiches for school or work lunches. Because it is such a constant part of our routine, even tiny variations in quality add up. Over months and years, those cheap fillers and chemical additives accumulate, impacting both your physical well-being and your wallet as you unknowingly pay premium prices for low-grade industrial manufacturing. The reality of modern supermarket shelves is that the brands plastering their packaging with beautiful, rustic, healthy-looking imagery are often the exact ones hiding the worst ingredients. We are going to count down from number 7 to the single best loaf you can buy, so you know exactly what to look for next time you're at the checkouts. But to understand why these brands fail us, we have to look at how the entire Australian baking industry underwent a massive shift. Go back a few generations and bread was remarkably straightforward. It required just 4 basic elements: flour, water, yeast, and salt. It was a live, fermented food that came from a local baker. Today, mass-produced bread is less of a traditional baked good and more of a highly engineered industrial formulation. This shift did not happen by accident. It was driven by intense commercial incentives. Supermarkets demand a loaf that can survive days of transport, sit on a shelf for a week without growing a speck of mold, and remain incredibly soft to the touch, so consumers think it is fresh. To achieve this, major commercial bakers had to completely alter the traditional process. They shortened the fermentation time from hours to mere minutes using intensive mechanical mixing. Because the dough doesn't have time to develop naturally, they have to pump it full of extra ingredients just to make it behave like real bread. While a traditional loaf has 4 ingredients, a standard Australian supermarket loaf can easily feature 15 to 20. Emulsifiers are added to keep the fat and water from separating. Synthetic enzymes are tossed in to artificially soften the crumb, and chemical preservatives are mixed in to extend shelf life far beyond nature's limits. The regulations in Australia allow for many of these processing aids to be omitted from the final label if they do not serve a functional purpose in the finished product, meaning what you see on the packet is only part of the story. Big commercial operations decide what goes into a standard loaf based on profit margins and supply chain logistics, not nutritional value. Those golden wheat fields and freshly baked slogans on the plastic bag are a marketing facade designed to distract from a highly industrialized manufacturing process. By the time we look at the top options today, you will look at bread labels with a completely different perspective. With that context in mind, let's start ranking, starting with the brand that just barely makes the list. You look at the bread aisle, and everything seems to scream premium, rustic, or wholesome. For our first brand, let's talk about one of those labels you see everywhere, the kind that charges a premium price point while positioning itself as a cut above the standard white sandwich loaf. The packaging looks great, often using earthy tones or words like traditional and artisan to imply you're buying something crafted with care. But when you flip the bag over and check the back, the story changes. A truly clean loaf of bread requires very few ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and salt. Instead, this brand's ingredient list is a dense block of text filled with industrial additives. We aren't just talking about a bit of extra sugar to help the yeast rise. If you look closely, you'll find emulsifiers like mono and diglycerides, which commercial bakeries use to keep bread soft on shelves for weeks, alongside chemical preservatives like calcium propionate. In independent testing by consumer groups like Choice Australia, These types of mass-produced premium loaves often rank surprisingly low in actual nutritional value compared to local bakery options, despite costing nearly double the price of a standard supermarket loaf. You're essentially paying a premium for marketing and packaging, while eating the exact same highly processed base ingredients found in the cheapest bread on the shelf. It makes you instantly wonder if the loaf sitting in your own kitchen right now is pulling the exact same trick. That's a relatively mild example of how marketing masks reality. The next brand on our list is worse, and it's marketed specifically as a healthier option. When you move up the shelf to the premium, health-conscious options, things get even more interesting. Brand number 6 relies entirely on your desire to make a better choice for your body, specifically targeting the health-conscious consumer with their specialized multigrain and wholemeal ranges. The packaging usually features rustic, earth-toned imagery, fields of gold wheat, and clear call-outs boasting about essential nutrients and complex grains. It looks like the ultimate wellness staple, and because of that premium positioning, it commands a much higher price than the standard white loaves sitting right next to it. But if you flip that loaf over and look past the marketing imagery, the actual ingredients tell a very different story. The biggest misconception here is what terms like multigrain actually mean under Australian food standards. Food Standards Australia-New Zealand does not strictly regulate the exact percentage of whole grains required to label a bread as multigrain. Because of this regulatory looseness, multigrain often simply means white bread with a small handful of diverse grains thrown into the mix. In fact, if you check the ingredient list for this specific sub-range, the very first ingredient listed is typically standard, highly refined wheat flour, which is structurally identical to white flour. The actual mixed grain content frequently hovers around a mere 10 to 15%. This leads to a massive discrepancy between how your body processes this bread and how you think it does. Because the base is still primarily refined white flour, the glycemic index remains incredibly high. Unlike genuine, dense, whole grain loaves where intact seeds and fiber slow down digestion to provide sustained energy, these refined flour with added grain products cause a rapid spike in blood glucose levels, followed by a quick crash. To make matters worse, that soft, appealing texture often requires a surprising amount of added sugar or emulsifiers to keep the structure consistent despite the heavy grains, effectively hiding refined carbohydrates behind a healthy facade. When you weigh the actual nutritional value against the price premium, the math simply doesn't add up. You're essentially paying a luxury tax for standard white flour dressed up with just enough seeds to satisfy a legal loophole. It creates a genuine sense of frustration when you realize that the product you specifically chose to support your well-being is mostly just clever marketing. If that surprised you, brand number 5 is going to really change how you read bread labels. Let's talk about Subway. For decades, they built an entire empire around the idea of the healthy alternative to traditional fast food. You walk in, the smell of baking bread hits you, and you see a counter full of fresh vegetables. But in 2014, a massive wave of public scrutiny hit the brand, and it all came down to a single ingredient hiding in their dough, azodicarbonamide. Most people couldn't pronounce it, but it quickly became known in the headlines by a much simpler, far more alarming name, the yoga mat chemical. In the commercial baking industry, azodicarbonamide serves a very specific purpose. It's a bleaching agent and a dough conditioner. When you are operating tens of thousands of franchises globally, consistency is everything. You need dough that can withstand automated processing, stretch predictably, rise fast, and maintain a uniform texture from New York to Tokyo. This chemical essentially acts as a structural reinforcement, allowing the dough to hold more gas and stay incredibly pillowy. But outside of the food industry, azodicarbonamide is primarily used to manufacture plastics, synthetic leather, and shoe soles. It's what gives yoga mats their spongy, flexible elasticity. When you think about bread, you think of a natural living process yeast fermenting, creating air pockets, and baking into a crisp crust. Instead, commercial efficiency substituted that patient craft with a chemical shortcut. The very compound used to keep your exercise mat from tearing under pressure was being used to give a sandwich roll its chewiness. From a business standpoint, this isn't just a quirk, it's an absolute necessity for their bottom line. Traditional bread spoils quickly. It gets stale, it molds, and it requires skilled labor to bake correctly. By utilizing heavy-duty dough conditioners, A corporate supply chain can ship frozen dough over massive distances, store it for extended periods, and ensure that a low-wage worker can pop it in an oven with zero margin for error. The backlash was swift. While the FDA classified the additive as generally recognized as safe in limited quantities, the European Union and Australia had already banned it entirely after studies linked its raw form to respiratory issues like asthma in industrial workers. The idea that a health-focused brand was using a synthetic plastic expander in their daily bread caused a massive rift in consumer trust, eventually forcing Subway to completely remove the ingredient from their formulation. Speaking of texture, let's actually put one of these loaves to the test. We've all left a loaf of bread on the counter and completely forgotten about it, only to find it weeks later looking exactly the same as the day we bought it. To really understand what's happening inside supermarket bread, it helps to look at a straightforward experiment. Take a standard, preservative-heavy supermarket loaf and place it right next to a genuinely fresh loaf from a local bakery. Leave them both out for 2 weeks and just watch how they age. Within 4 to 5 days, the bakery loaf begins to change. It hardens, loses its moisture, and soon small patches of green and white mold start to surface. By day 14, nature has completely taken its course. The supermarket loaf, however, tells a completely different story. After a full fortnight on the counter, it still feels relatively soft. There's no mold in sight, and it looks almost entirely unchanged. While a loaf that never goes bad seems convenient, it forces us to ask why one visibly decays while the other doesn't. Genuinely fresh bread consists of just a few basic elements: flour, water, yeast, and salt. Without intervention, ambient moisture and airborne fungal spores cause mold to develop within days. Supermarket bread avoids this fate through the addition of specific chemical preservatives, most notably calcium propionate and sorbic acid. These compounds actively inhibit the growth of mold and bacteria, artificially extending the bread's shelf life from days to weeks. Seeing this side-by-side contrast makes it clear that the texture and appearance of supermarket bread are entirely managed by chemistry. We aren't just eating flour and yeast, we are consuming a formulation designed specifically to resist the natural process of decay. Keep that image in mind, because brand number 4 uses almost the exact same trick. That brings us directly to the 4th brand on our list, and it perfectly illustrates exactly what we saw in the shelf life experiment. If you have ever wondered how a loaf of bread can sit on your kitchen bench for over a week in the middle of an Australian summer and still feel as soft as the day you bought it, this brand holds the answer. The ingredient label reads more like an industrial manufacturing blueprint than a traditional recipe. We are talking about a massive consumer trade-off here. On the surface, it looks like a win for a busy household. It is convenient, it doesn't go stale quickly, and it is always available at the local supermarket. But when you look past that convenience, you see what you are sacrificing for that longevity. To keep that bread soft and mold-free, the manufacturers rely heavily on specific emulsifiers, regulatory acids, and humectants designed to artificially lock in moisture. This sets up a frustrating financial reality for Australian shoppers. Right now, across major supermarket chains, a loaf from this brand will generally cost you anywhere between $4 and $6. When you compare that to a genuinely fresh, traditionally baked alternative from a local bakery, which usually sits around $7 to $9, the price gap doesn't look that massive. The real issue is the value disconnect. Data tracking consumer spending reveals that we are collectively spending millions more on packaged commercial bread every year, mistakenly believing that the mid to high price supermarket options offer better nutrition. You are paying a premium price, not for high quality grain or traditional baking methods, but for the industrial engineering required to make a product last forever on a truck and a shelf. You're essentially paying extra for a chemical compromise. Now we're getting into the ones that genuinely surprise me. Brand 3 is a name almost everyone trusts. When you look at the major players in the bread industry, one name stands out for its massive market share. It's the brand that has spent decades building a flawless reputation as a trusted household staple, making it the automatic choice for millions of families every single week. People buy it without a second thought because it represents comfort, reliability, and tradition. But when you peek behind that wall of consumer trust, the gap between the brand's premium reputation and its actual formulation is striking. On the front of the packaging, you'll find prominent claims highlighting specific health benefits, like being a great source of fiber or containing essential grains. However, the fine print tells a different story. To maintain its massive production scale and keep costs down, the brand frequently uses highly processed flour bases combined with synthetic dough conditioners and preservatives to extend shelf life far beyond a natural timeline. In fact, major consumer watchdogs and regulatory groups have previously flagged how these massive commercial brands use loophole wording to make a product sound like an artisan choice when it is actually rolling off a high-speed industrial assembly line. When you pay extra for a brand because you believe it's inherently better for your health, discovering that the ingredients are functionally identical to the cheapest generic loaf on the lower shelf feels like a complete betrayal of that trust. If that one stung, brace yourself, because the next loaf on our list is aimed directly at your kids. This brings us to a category of bread that relies entirely on colourful, friendly packaging to catch the eyes of busy parents and young children in the supermarket aisle. The marketing strategy here is clever. It positions the bread as a fun, everyday staple that kids will love to eat, while quietly reassuring parents with large text emphasizing vitamins, minerals, or soft textures that mean no left-behind crusts. The reality inside the bag is a major concern for childhood nutrition. To make the bread highly appealing to younger palates, these formulations often contain significantly higher levels of added sugars or highly refined starches compared to standard loaves. Public health researchers, including a major university study on food marketing to children, have consistently raised alarms about how these products normalize a high-sugar, ultra-processed diet from an early age. When kids consume these fast-digesting, highly refined carbohydrates before school, it triggers rapid spikes and subsequent crashes in blood sugar levels, which teachers and pediatricians directly link to fluctuations in children's energy and concentration throughout the classroom day. Despite voluntary industry advertising codes meant to limit targeting children with low-nutrient foods, the bright characters and strategic shelf placement ensure these loaves remain a staple in family trolleys. Parents buy them out of a protective instinct to give their kids the best start to the day, unaware that the ingredients inside are working against their child's focus. UOW. And this isn't even the worst one. Which brings us to number 1, the loaf that started this whole investigation. For an in-depth breakdown of how everyday grocery staples hidden in your pantry might be quietly affecting your diet, check out this comprehensive look into Australian grocery brand choices, which details independent label analyses and the hidden patterns behind supermarket marketing. When you walk down the bread aisle with a toddler in the trolley or a school lunchbox checklist in your head, your eyes are naturally drawn to specific packets. This next brand on our list, sitting right at number 2, has mastered the art of family-focused marketing. The packaging uses soft, inviting colors, friendly fonts, and explicit claims about growth, everyday energy, and essential vitamins. It positions itself as the ultimate choice for growing kids, giving parents that comforting feeling that they are making a responsible, healthy choice for their household. If you flip that kid-friendly packet over and scan the fine print, the illusion dissolves. To make the bread highly palatable to children, the formulation frequently features high levels of added sugars, refined starches, and specific regulatory additives designed to maintain an ultra-soft texture. It is a formula engineered for taste and texture preference rather than sustained nutrition. Food marketing regulations in Australia place strict limits on how products can be advertised directly to children on television, but the packaging itself remains a powerful, unregulated billboard designed to appeal directly to a parent's desire to provide the best for their family. The real concern here is how these fast-digesting, high-glycemic carbohydrates and additives interact with the child's day. Pediatric dietitians and researchers have heavily studied the relationship between dietary intake and early afternoon concentration levels in school-aged children. When a child eats a sandwich made from highly refined flour and hidden sugars, it triggers a rapid spike in blood glucose, followed shortly after by a sharp crash. In a classroom environment, that crash often manifests as behavioral irritability, restlessness, and a sudden drop in focus right when they need it most. Parents often blame the afternoon slump on a lack of sleep or school stress, without realizing the culprit was the seemingly innocent sandwich packed at 7 a.m. Choosing a loaf based on wholesome family imagery can mean unwittingly filling a child's diet with empty calories and processing aids that actively work against their energy levels and focus throughout the school day. It is an incredibly frustrating realization for anyone trying to do the right thing by their family, and yet this isn't even the worst offender on the supermarket shelf. Which brings us to number one, the loaf that started this whole investigation. The single worst choice on the shelf is the ultra-premium artisanal imposter loaf. This is the brand that doesn't just ask you to pay a little extra. It sits at the very highest price tier in the supermarket aisle, often costing more than double the price of a standard loaf. The packaging is a masterclass in premium design, using thick paper fill bags, minimalist fonts, and evocative words like handcrafted, stone-baked, or authentic heritage sourdough. It positions itself as the ultimate choice for health-conscious consumers who want to completely avoid cheap, mass-produced industrial food. The reason this brand ranks as the definitive worst choice is that the gap between its luxury price and its actual industrial formulation is the widest in the entire supermarket. When independent food analysts examine the ingredient panel, they find that it uses the exact same high-speed industrial shortcuts as the budget loaves. True artisan bread relies on a long, natural fermentation process that takes up to 12 or 24 hours to naturally break down gluten and develop flavor. This brand skips that time entirely. Instead, it uses a chemical cocktail of dough conditioners like emulsifiers, 471 and 481, to artificially force the dough to rise in a fraction of the time. To mimic the complex, tangy flavor of real fermentation, the manufacturer simply pumps in regulatory loopholes like vinegar, acetic acid, or cultured wheat. This creates a product that looks and tastes like a premium loaf, but is functionally an ultra-processed food packed with synthetic processing aids. When you buy a luxury car, you expect a premium engine, not a budget model engine hidden under a shiny chassis. Yet, that is exactly what is happening here. You are paying a massive premium for what is essentially cheap, aerated factory starch, wrapped in beautiful marketing. If you compare the price per gram of this loaf to a genuine sourdough from a local independent bakery that uses only flour, water, salt, and thyme, you are often paying the exact same amount of money or more for a bag full of commercial additives. The next time you see this brand on the shelf, the best move you can make is to leave it exactly where it is. Do not let the rustic aesthetic fool you into believing it is a premium product. Instead, flip the bag over, look for the presence of numbers, emulsifiers, or an unnaturally long shelf life. And remember that real quality cannot be faked with clever graphic design. So now you know what to avoid, but that's only half the story. Here's exactly what to put in your trolley instead.